Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Schmidt. I'm here with Dr. Scott Jensen, and we're going to be doing a little bit of an interview today. We're going to be talking with each other about a bunch of different things. A media company that I'm starting. We're going to be talking about Scott Jensen's lawsuit, his book that he came out with a couple months ago, and then kind of a recap. The campaign's been over for about 9 months now, and so talking a little bit about that. And so I'm going to actually pass it over to Scott to start this thing out and interview me for a change. For those of you out there who are watching this and don't remember or don't know me, I was a part of your campaign for governor. You and I started a podcast a couple years ago, and it went up to one of the top government podcasts in the world, and mostly because of you. But I was on the podcast, and so we did a lot of episodes, had a lot of fun. So, anyways, I'll pass it over to you if you want to get this thing started.
I'd be glad to. It's sort of fun for me, Andy, to sit in the desk or the chair where I get to interview you. You're right. We did do a podcast. You and I met in the early stages of the campaign.
Yeah.
And we did a podcast, and it did well, and we had some fascinating guests. I remember specifically having an attorney from out of state who represented many interests of people who felt the hard squashing blow of government policies gone amok. And so I appreciated the time we spent together. So you called me a month or two ago and said, you're starting this company, and you wanted to know if I'd be willing to be sort of your first interview for your podcast. So why don't you tell the audience, what is your plan in regards to the podcast? What kind of schedule will you be doing for the podcast?
Yeah, so I guess I'll back it up a little bit for people who, just to give them a little introduction to what the company is. So the name of the company is Optiv, O-P-T-I-V. The reason we named it that is one of the goals is to kind of we want to look at different political and philosophical and theological issues from different perspectives. So we took the word optical and we took the word perspective and we just threw them together and it became Optiv. And so that idea came about years ago, and then after the campaign, I really saw that there was an issue, I think, among younger people. I'm 23, so Gen Zers and millennials, where it's very difficult for them to have conversations with people they disagree with. And so, with friends of mine, family even, we would have these political conversations, and oftentimes they would become like emotionally hostile, and wouldn't be able to be friends with each other anymore because we disagreed on things. And that, to me, I think is not the right way to do politics or to have conversations. And so I wanted to start a media company where you could get somebody on the right and on the left to sit down and have a conversation and be spirited and have good debate.
So you're looking at something that would be nonpartisan. It would be centered around civil discourse where we learn to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And if we do disagree, we don't pivot towards contempt, because it seems like that's what we've done.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrific idea. I'm struck by the fact that generationally, your generation is different than mine. I grew up in the 60s, civil rights, landing on the moon, things like that. But we didn't have phones, shoot 'em out. We still had many homes that still had party lines. And that means that not every household had their own phone number. And so we did have probably a little bit more to and fro, back and forth in terms of conversations. It seems to me like your generation has the potential to be perhaps a little bit more almost introspective. You spend more time with yourself. You can spend time with your phone, but even on a phone chat, you can step away for a little bit. You can, if you need to, reestablish some distance in terms of what's going on that chat board or whatever you're doing. So the idea of doing something that's focused on, hey, I want to make sure that my generation, the Gen Zs and the millennials, that we have a place we can go and hear about it. And I think you're going to be marvelously successful if you can bring that focus to your podcast, where people, when they're done, maybe can tick off 3 or 4 things that they learned, but also not feel like they've been angered or harassed or bullied.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not just podcasts. We're also doing written work as well. So one of the other issues that we run into, and you and I got into a little bit of debate about a year and a half or 2 years ago at the state fair, I told you that the average attention span of an American is less than 7 seconds, and you didn't believe me. I don't know if you remember this, but you didn't believe me.
I do remember this.
And then I sent you the article, and that proved it, that Time Magazine, about like 2016, that the average attention span in the United States is less than 7 seconds. And I think that that's a problem, because to understand the complexities of things like politics and our government and our society, you have to be able to really be able to read and converse with people and think for yourself. And when you're only able to think for 7 seconds, then you need a new dopamine hit, which is what you get on TikTok and some of these social media platforms. You have a hard time conversing with people in real life. And so
that dopamine hit that you're referring to is when you look and there's this instant of pleasure. You see that there were 10 new shares, or there were 14 more new views.
Yeah.
Now, you used a word I'm going to have to ask you to retract. You said that you proved it to me because you showed it in Time Magazine.
Okay, yeah.
I think what you did was you substantiated your claim.
Okay, yeah.
But I think if indeed proving it is finding a source that says it, then I have to go back to that movie. It was a Christmas movie where the little girl says, or Santa Claus, and they end up finding that it was maybe some newspaper, the Sun Times, and it says, well, if the Sun Times says it, it must be true.
Okay.
We used to feel that way, but today there is so much blatant recruitment of one or two sources, and then you can hang your hat on that and blow everybody else off.
Yeah.
To that point, let's just dive into something, because it sounds like this is part and parcel of your mission with Optiv. Recently, there's been the big brouhaha about Dr. Peter Hotez, Joe Rogan, and Robert Kennedy. So there's an article, and this was CNN, arguably left-leaning CNN.
Arguably, yeah.
The title was, "A Prominent Vaccine Scientist Says He Was Stalked in Front of Home After Joe Rogan Twitter Exchange." I don't want to dissect he said, she said all the way along.
Yeah.
I think it's enough to say that Joe Rogan and Robert Kennedy had a conversation. Conversation was broad in breadth, included vaccines, included many things. Afterwards, the Twitter board got hot, and Dr. Peter Hotez retweeted a tweet that was easily interpreted as being sharply critical of Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
And I think the word misinformation came up. Joe Rogan said, hey, let's stop this childlike bickering.
Yeah.
Have you both on my show. We can have a congenial debate, and for your time and trouble.
Yeah. He said you can go as long as you want, too.
Yeah. I'll give you a $100,000 check to be donated to the charity of your choice.
Yeah.
Dr. Hotez comes back and says, oh, no, you don't. I'm not going to let you trick me. But I think what was interesting is, as Dr. Hotez started to talk about it, he came out with this statement that he was stalked. Now, if you look up in Webster's dictionary, stalk, you're generally talking about someone or something involving prey or some sort of query.
Right.
You're saying you're going to persistently pursue and potentially attack. I don't know if that's what Dr. Hotez had experienced, because I read in one account that he had some people at his home maybe hollering at him, why don't you have the debate? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting was that Robert Kennedy's response to Hotez was, can't we have a respectful, congenial, informative debate?
Yeah.
And Dr. Hotez is out there saying, I'm being stalked. And I think this is just exactly what is, I think, driving so many people mildly crazy that we can't have conversation. And so to get back to the mission, again, of your newly formed company, Optiv, you want to say, no, we're going to stand separate from all the bickering. We're going to be a place, whether it's our website, whether it's our podcast, we're going to have civil discourse, libs, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, apolitical, political.
Right.
We're going to demonstrate that we can have the conversation. And when we're done, we don't feel like we just made an enemy.
Yeah.
We feel like maybe we got just a little bit of insight. Is that accurate? And if it is, would you go ahead and talk a little bit about your perspective on the Rogan, Hotez, Kennedy issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, that's accurate. That's exactly what we want to do, and that's what we're starting. I mean, we just started our first brand new politics podcast called Across the Aisle, and it's where I sit down with a liberal guy, a friend of mine from the East Coast. He's PhD, went to Hopkins University. He's a teacher. He's very left-leaning, and him and I will sit down every single week, and we'll discuss a big political topic, and we'll both be fiery and passionate, and we'll debate hard. But we're not gonna. We've committed to not bickering, not name calling, and not hating each other afterwards. So and that's a weekly podcast that we just started, so people can go listen to that.
So you're going to have a weekly podcast, fiery in nature, without name calling, and you're committed to doing this after having spent 2 years on our campaign team, seeing an incredible amount of slings and arrows being cast. Seeing literally people in tears, sometimes people accused of lying, sometimes accused of doing something far more nefarious than that. It's interesting that boiling up from your 2-year experience, you're absolutely committed saying, fiery, yes. Passion, yes. Name calling, no. Contempt, no. We can do it across the aisle.
Yeah,
Hats off to you.
You got to be mature. I mean, the bottom line, and this is what James.
I can't let you say mature because then you are judging. That's one of the things we have to watch for. When someone says we have to be mature, then that's saying that someone else isn't being mature. We do that so much that we have to be careful of the words we choose. Boy, if I learned one thing running for governor, I've got to be ever more careful of the words I choose, because if I use the word mature and that's a positive word, that's perceived as something you want, and then someone else is impulsive. So someone gets to be mature and someone gets to be impulsive. I think we all know what we would want to be described as. So I think we have to be careful of that.
Sure. I guess the point that I guess what I was trying to make was, I think to James Madison's quote that democracy, gosh, I'm trying to remember the exact quote. A democracy can't work unless it's under a virtuous people. That the people that make up the democracy need to have some sort of virtue, whether that's a Christian virtue or a religious virtue or something like that. And I think that's the underlying goal. I mean, usually when media companies start up, they will go and try to get talent, writers, they'll try to get podcast hosts, and they'll try to get people that agree with a certain ideology or a certain perspective or a political party. And so you'll be conservative, and then you'll have to kind of submit to the conservative values of the company, or you'll be liberal and you have to submit to the liberal values. Well, we couldn't do that because we don't want to be a conservative company or a liberal company. So we had to figure out what are things that we can all get behind on our team that aren't going to be conservative, like that aren't going to be Republican talking points or liberal talking points. And so we created these core pursuits and core values that kind of centered around the dignity of the human person, and that the way that we treat other people doesn't change on the basis of what political party that we're assigned to or that
what
we
are those
believe
core
in.
values?
Yeah, so that we're going to be respectful, that we're going to view the other person as if that they're a human being. And I think that oftentimes what social media does, especially
that comes across as who wouldn't treat us as human. That seems a little mushy.
It probably okay. So my generation is used to having conversations over the phone. So it's incredibly easy to dehumanize the person that we're having conversations with, because we're hiding behind a keyboard and we're able to say this thing not to a person. I'm not doing this with everybody in my generation. We're just texting, we're on Twitter. And so it's easy to dehumanize somebody doing that because you're not seeing them, you're not in an interpersonal relationship with them. And so for younger people, the interpersonal relationship is really, really important. Being there in person, being face to face, seeing the person that you're talking to, watching the way that they interact with the things that you're saying, and being forced in that situation to listen to them. I mean, I'm trying to listen to what you're saying, you're trying to listen to what I'm saying, but oftentimes on social media you just talk past each other because you're not there in real time, interacting. And so the second thing is, I know you probably will jump on this one a little bit, but trying to be as truthful as we possibly can. And I know this is going to be difficult because, like you said, I mean, conservatives and liberals often find their facts and statistics from different sources, and And so people will just throw sources at each other, and they'll be like, well, I'm telling the truth because of this study that was done, or I'm telling the truth because of this study that was done. And
So you've just summarized for me, Andy, some core convictions
sure.
for Optive. You mentioned a quote whereby a democracy, in order for it to work, has to, if you will, be held up by a virtuous people. That makes me think of the word virtue. And I think of the classical virtues versus the Christian virtues.
Sure.
I think the classical virtues are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Then you've got your three add-on Christian virtues of basically faith, hope, and charity.
Yeah, okay.
And I think when I look at that, if that's going to be the bedrock of core convictions for your company, you're off to a terrific start.
Sure.
I really do.
Yeah, I think, right, and I just to go back, I guess I want to go to the point of what it means to be truthful, because I think that is important. And the underlying agreement here, there's a lot of people in my generation. So I have a friend who started a Marxist media company, and there's fundamental disagreements on human anthropology there. So for Optive, it's like, are we going to have people who who are on a completely different philosophical worldview, who think that human beings are something that they're not? No, but we're gonna start up from a more Western philosophical perspective and a more classical liberal perspective. So there are ideas that we're probably just going to reject, because it's not like every single idea can come to the table and all have their equal spots at the table, because like Marxism has been tried in the 20th century, I'm not really interested in platforming that type of ideology. And so there are things, it's not like every idea is welcome, but as far as starting from a Western standpoint of okay, here's natural law, and we're going to kind of build our arguments out of that, and if we're wrong, we need to have the humility to say, okay, I was wrong, and I'll be able to be corrected. I think that's really important to the truth.
Do you think truth changes?
I think... I don't think the fundamental truth changes. Like I don't think.
Give me a fundamental truth.
Okay, that I'm a man. I think that doesn't change. I think that you can discover that the truth you can perceive it as changing, because as human beings we're discovering new things, and we're engaging in the scientific method, and we're learning new things. So we can perceive things as, oh, we just discovered this new thing, so that changes our perspective on X. But on the fundamental level of reality, and I think the way in which maybe God views the world, of course it doesn't. The truth doesn't change, I don't think. I mean, what do you think?
I think that the question is so challenging to answer that it begs another question. And that's the sign of a good question, is it leads to another one, not to an answer. I think if I ask you, does the truth change? I think the second question that would come up is, if it does change, would it still be true? Would it still be regarded as the truth? And I think that's the slippery slope that we have right now in our country, is everybody's out there waving their hand, pounding the table, saying, I'm telling the truth. I think this is a perfect place to just briefly talk about something that's gone on for the last 3 years during the COVID pandemic. And that's to dissect two words. And those words may provide more ready human handles by which to carve a conversation out than the word truth. And those two words would be misinformation and disinformation. Because if you go to Webster's dictionary and you look at what misinformation is, it is merely what might have been thought to be true on a Monday has changed by Friday. And so if you spoke it on Tuesday, you might have with all your heart and mind felt it was true. But if you addressed it on Saturday, you might be recanting and saying, well, on Tuesday I thought this, but over the last 24 to 48 hours we've seen this. And I have to ask myself the question, was I inadvertently guilty of spreading misinformation? And at that point in time, you could say that so many of our early scientific hypotheses or proposals did end up to be disproved, and so would have been misinformation.
Sure.
It's almost as if in order for an idea to percolate and have that potential aha discovery moment, you have to risk
Yeah.
that it may be misinformation.
Yeah.
Now that's sharply in contrast
Yeah.
to disinformation, which if you look in the
Yeah.
dictionary will frequently or almost always say a deliberate intent to deceive with either perhaps a commonly held belief, slightly massaged, or perhaps a half-truth, or perhaps the truth taken out of context.
Yeah.
But the deliberate intent to deceive or mislead
Yeah.
is, I think, critical ingredient of disinformation.
Yeah.
And I think someone said the other day, and it was a physician, they said, doctors have to reserve the right to be wrong. And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, I have to reserve the right, because I could see you tomorrow for a medical malady that you have, and I could say, Andy, I looked at the physical exam, I looked at your answers to my questions, I looked at the laboratory work and the imaging tests, and I believe you have XYZ.
Yeah.
And this is what I think we may have to do.
Sure.
And yet, it's possible that a few days later, or a few weeks later, or a few months later, more information might have entered the scene.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say to you, Andy, XYZ isn't correct.
Yeah.
I have to be able to be wrong.
Right. Which requires the virtue of humility. And
does.
this is what free speech is here for, so that we can be wrong and then be corrected and become right. I mean, people at their nature, I believe, as a Christian, are sinful, and so we're gonna get things wrong. But the quest for truth is not being correct the entire time; it's being willing to be corrected the entire time. And so,
and that gets at that issue of disinformation, misinformation being an allowable part of a dialogue, an evolving dialogue, disinformation being something that smacks at the heart of a nefarious agenda to mislead or deceive deliberately.
right.
Okay, then in order for us to identify someone as being guilty of disinformation, that's a hard thing because you're getting then at motive. You're going at someone and you're saying, well, you're guilty of disinformation. At some level, you're saying, I know you did this deliberately. I know you wanted to deceive. That's the hard part. That's actually why we have these laws called FOIA or Data Practices Act, where people like you or a journalist or me, as I seek to achieve justice with the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice coming after me 6 different times, or the Attorney General getting involved in the case, I'm saying the only way I can really demonstrate to a judge or a jury that I've been wronged is for me to have all the information that you've been passing along back and forth between the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice and the Attorney General's office. So I request all the emails, all the messages, all the documents that have to do with Scott Jensen or Dr. Scott Jensen or my case.
Yeah.
And then in my situation, we've got the Attorney General Keith Ellison saying, we're not going to give them all to you. There's a reason we have statute that says you have to. It's because it's in getting a hold of those emails between various parties that we can find, was your motive nefarious?
Yeah.
Did you actually know that this wasn't true, but you wanted to hold it out longer? You wanted it to hover like a gray cloud over the breadth of the campaign between Scott Jensen and his opponent. So I'm struck by the fact that in order for us to be able to get at that distinction between misinformation and disinformation, we have to go into that fraught ground of assigning motive. And we don't get to try to read someone else's mind and say, I get to know your motive and here it is. We sort of have to peel away the layers of obfuscation. And that means we've got to be able to see those emails, we've got to see those documents, and that's why the government has been, if you will, held with its feet to the fire, that when a FOIA request legitimately put forward, or a Data Practices Act legitimately put forward, they have to comply, because otherwise they will potentially have absolutely been participating in disinformation, a nefarious agenda,
Yeah.
and they will hide, and
Yeah.
we'll never be able to bring those people to justice.
Now, I want to. So when you're talking about, I mean, you're talking about this at a high level, at the governmental level, and I think what I guess I'm around people who I'm not dealing with high level governmental officials or people higher in the hierarchy. I'm dealing with everyday people, my family, my friends, and I think sometimes what can get lost in the shuffle is that we see these things happen at the top, and we start to believe that this stuff is happening in our close relationships, that everybody's they're disinforming, they're a disinformation to me, and this is, if I'm talking to you, that I believe that you're doing this to me. I wonder, do you think, what should our perspective be? Because it feels like we're trying to toe the line between, as a Christian, grace and truth. How do you interact with that? Because you can't become paranoid. Some people become paranoid. Everybody's
Just because you're
lying to them.
paranoid doesn't mean you're wrong.
I know. I'm not saying that. No, I think you should be paranoid about certain things. But if you're paranoid about the wrong things, sometimes it can damage very important relationships that you have with people. So how should the average everyday person deal with it? Because I don't trust the government as much as you don't trust the government. So
I think that we're literally at a place in the history of humanity where we need to go back 2,000 years ago, and regardless of what your beliefs are religiously, I think if you read the accounts in the Christian Gospels regarding the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, we see the model there. We see a model whereby Jesus doesn't lecture Nicodemus as much as he throws him questions. And he confuses Nicodemus. And what he does is he drives Nicodemus into a place where Nicodemus realizes that he has to do some soul searching. That, to me, is where we have to go. We need to recognize that the virtues of, as we mentioned before, prudence and temperance and justice and fortitude and faith and hope and charity, we need to let those push us into that place of soul searching, because that's the only way. We only get to change one person in the world, and that's us. We don't get to change the other person. We might try to influence them. We might try to convince them that their perspective is perhaps ill-advised or perhaps incomplete. But we get to change ourselves. And in changing ourselves, we oftentimes will be more effective at helping someone else shape their perspective. And that's arguably the goal of a dialogue.
Right.
So I think that it has to be about engagement. It has to be about genuine soul searching. I don't think there's anything wrong with pushing back. But if you're going to push back, if you do it with name calling, you're not going to get what you want. Nobody is. If you do it with questions, you got a legitimate chance. You can actually change people's minds. That's partly why I wrote the book. I wrote the book, We've Been Played. And I wrote this book because I wanted to expose the triad of tyranny: big pharma, big tech, and big government. You said before that I've been dealing with some high-level things, but you're not. You're dealing with everyday people. I would dispute that. I would say that in the same way the title of this book, We've Been Played, applies to what government has done to 325 million U.S. citizens, I would say that we unwittingly do that to one another. We play one another. Watch a conversation, even if it's a bunch of people sitting around a table just chilling. Maybe you got 6 people having a conversation over a glass of wine. Watch when that first sidebar conversation takes place. There'll be a conversation going on, and perhaps they're talking about climate change. Someone will lean over to the next person and say, well, isn't that ridiculous that such and such? And you wouldn't ever agree with that, would you? All of a sudden, those two now are, if you will, leaning into each other, recruiting one another, so then the two of them can go back to the general conversation between the 6 of them if you will, with the ammunition of this isn't one person.
Right.
This is both of us.
Yeah.
Looking to recruit that third one, looking to recruit the fourth one. What's the goal? The goal is groupthink. It's to get that group of 6 thinking the way I want you to think.
Right. Right.
And there's terrific examples of groupthink all over.
Yeah.
But I really think that just as much as there's been this challenge by my book, we've been played at governmental levels, I think that challenge has to be brought right down to our Thanksgiving dinner, right next to the softball team just got done playing their ball game, and people are sitting around eating some munchies or having an ice cream cone or drinking a beer. We play each other, and we've got to get better at stopping it and saying, hold it, can we hold off on the sidebar conversations? Can we keep in attendance to the speaker here? Because if we don't, which speaker is it that doesn't get to have the full attention of the audience?
Right,
Because as soon as you start a sidebar conversation,
Yeah.
you're saying whatever you have to say isn't as important.
Yeah.
I had the floor, everybody listened to me,
Yep.
but we're not going to give you that same courtesy.
Well, this is interesting. This is one of the things I admired about your campaign was what you're talking about right now is that your goal was to come in. I mean, what it felt like to me that your goal was, hey, I don't have all the answers to everything, but I want to start conversations and talk to different people and try to figure out what's really going on, regardless of what the topic of conversation was. And so, as you look back, now the campaign has been done for 9 months, and you look back over the past 2 years and from when you started and how the campaign went. How have you changed? How has your perspective changed on politics, or even just you as a person? I mean, it's been a crazy couple of years.
Well, I certainly learned a lot, and you lose an election that you worked real hard at. You lose the campaign. You don't want to think it's for nothing. You don't want to. That's just a dark place to go. That I gave up literally 2 years of my life for nothing. So really, that's almost a place I couldn't go. So then I have to say, well, what did I learn? And certainly, I made tremendous number of mistakes, word choices. Sometimes I should have known better. In other situations, I just couldn't have known better. There are certain hot button words that may have been in existence before the campaign and I wasn't aware of them. But even during the campaign, new hot button words and phrases popped up.
Yeah.
And you almost have to
Have like
keep on
someone
top of
full
it.
time just working on that.
Yeah. Scott, you can't use these 4 words anymore, and you can't use that phrase. Why can't? Well, we did last month, and it was okay. He did it on that TV show, and she did it on that TV show. No, the world's changed. You can't do that anymore. Oh, okay. So I think that in terms of lessons, one is, and I was probably overly stubborn, thinking that I could just do a campaign where I spoke from the heart and talked about what was on my mind. I don't think you get to. We knew as a team that we needed to expand our name recognition. And we felt the best way to do that, we could go 2 ways. Go negative or go positive. I didn't want to go negative. So I wasn't going to do the name calling. I wasn't going to do the attacking, what do they call it, ad hominem attacks. I wasn't going to do that. So I wanted to go positive. So we would do these 10-point plans, whether we were talking about energy, public safety, even physical health and well-being. We did one on that. But we did 10-point plans on agriculture and business development and how to reach out to the minority communities. Honestly, every time we did a 10-point plan, it was like we were giving the opposition more ammunition to dive into. So I think one is word choices matter. 2 is...
Can I just ask a quick question about that? You're not saying that you would have gone back and done the name calling thing. You would have still kept the message positive, right? You would have just...
We did. We never went to the name calling.
Yeah.
You can go negative, you can go positive. I told the team we're not going negative.
We're not going negative. Okay. Yeah.
So we went positive.
Gotcha.
We went positive with 10-point plans. And we did this. And it didn't really seem to catch on. The media didn't want that. It wasn't juicy. They want salacious stuff. And so we got precious little attention from them, but we gave the other side things they could pick on. And that was a challenge. So I learned from the campaign. Be careful of word choices. Be careful about how many topics you touch on. I think perhaps the most galvanizing lesson that I learned was the Republican Party that I represented is in danger of being irrelevant. And at the end of the day, whether you're a group of people talking in a small group, a larger group, or a political party, relevance really matters. I would submit that a big part of the mental health issues we have in society today is so many people don't feel relevant. And so sometimes the best way to get relevance is to get notoriety. And notoriety means do something no one else is doing, or do something that's so obnoxious or even heinous that everybody will pay attention.
Notice,
And so I think that that was a pretty big deal. Was for me, I recognize that there's an awful lot of Gen Zs and millennials and Gen Xers that have a lot to say, and they have a different perspective that they grew up in. And I think that the Republican Party has been, if you will, slowly getting more and more out of touch. And we thought that we could play the classic game of politics and grab onto this issue that might be relevant for this group and this issue, but they weren't. We don't get to choose what's relevant. The masses will bubble that up. And when they do, you better be responsive. And if that means that something that's very relevant is free speech, parental rights, health freedom, abortion, Second Amendment, you can dodge and you can deflect and you can try to avoid some of these topics. But at the end of the day, when you choose to do those dodging, evading kinds of maneuvers, you fracture the relevance that you might bring to the table for that person or group of persons. And I think that was a huge epiphany for me, that we were literally, we were running a losing battle because literally every week or month, the topics we thought were critically important, they weren't relevant. And an awful lot of people who are between the ages of 15 and 45, they play politically between the 30-yard lines. They're not living down at the 5-yard line on either end. They're right there between the 30-yard lines, and they're paying attention. Maybe not as much as you might want them to, but they're paying attention, and they know it matters to them. And whatever matters to them is what political parties have to touch into. And when they do, and I think the Democratic Party did a much better job of saying, these three issues really matter. I think Republicans sometimes have a hard time acknowledging that one clear truth about government exists among most people, and that is this: government can and should be a safety net for those people who are down and out. There is no way that we would look at another human being and say, we want you to go without food in your belly, shelter over your head, and clothing on your back. So let's put it out there. Government has a role to play in being a safety net. Then let's say, how do we do that without creating, if you will, new problems, without undercutting a work ethic, without undercutting self-determinism, without undercutting your opportunity to dream and build the infrastructure underneath that dream so that you can say, aha, success. Now I'm going to go do this and I'm going to go do that. I know when I raised my kids, Andy, one of the most important things my wife and I learned was if we could get our kids at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 to succeed at something every week or month, we knew we were building their appetite to succeed some more. So sure, we all want to help the kid get walking at 1 year of age, and we want them potty trained sometime between 2 and 3. But if at 3.5 years of age, you can get them to count like no one else does, or to say 18 words in order that all start with an A, or to learn to spell, or to throw a ball, or whatever it is, you know you've got them on their way. And that's the way humans function best. We do something, we achieve it well, then we want to branch off and do something else the same way.
So I want to talk about what's going to happen in your life going forward. I mean, the campaign is over, and you still have people all over the country and all over the world even who look up to you, and they still follow you on social media, and they want to hear what you have to say. And I mean, there's a lot of people like myself who I look to you, and I think back to the reason why you started this whole thing, the public thing is, I mean, you stuck up for the thing that you believed was true, and you said, I'm not gonna write this thing down, or I'm not gonna interact with COVID in this particular way. And for a young person like me, and I think for a lot of young people who know you, that's what's admirable. I mean, there's a lot of things admirable, but that's what's mostly admirable. And so as you move forward, there's a lawsuit that you're pursuing right now. Do you want to, I guess, for people all over the country, explain what this is all about and how this came to be and what you're trying to do?
In my first book, I think I wrote the phrase, courage isn't bravery without fear. Courage is being brave when you are fearful. And I think that really captures what happened to me during COVID. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to go out there and model courage. Across my desk came information that many people didn't have, and I knew it didn't jive with past history, with the context of how we deal with other respiratory viral illnesses. And I sort of almost blurted out, this isn't right. I wasn't some courageous whistleblower. I just said, this can't be right. And then my world turned upside down. And that was where I had the first opportunity to either do the Jonah thing and run to the Mediterranean instead of going to Nineveh, or do the Esther thing and say, for such a time as this, I guess I'm here. I got to stick here.
Can I say, this is to our point of virtue, though. I mean, that when the rubber meets the road and you have to make that decision, what matters is what you've done your entire life, not what you're doing in that moment. And I think that that's what people should be pursuing in their personal life, so that if they hit this situation where they see something and they're like, there's something off here. A lot of people my age, they won't speak up, they won't say anything. It's better to stay safe than to deal with the consequences.
I think you're right, Andy. It's almost like through a lifetime you can gird yourself with an armor that will allow you to fend off some of the slings and arrows. And I have been so blessed. I mean, I'm not young, I'm in my late 60s. So I look at my professional career and had the chance to start my own clinic. My patients are so much more than simply patients, they're my friends. So when I look at all that, I can see one thing after another that has really allowed me to sort of put on a shield of armor. And in so doing, when it came time for me to, am I gonna back off, retract, and try to hide in the basement? Or am I gonna say, no, this is why you don't wanna do a death certificate the way you're telling us to do it. This is why you don't wanna count a COVID case based on simply having 2 or 3 cardinal symptoms without a test having been done. And literally, it just was like a domino effect. It was one thing after another. I remember Tony Robbins called because he wanted to talk to me about on his program about masks. And so I did the research on masks, and I broke it down in terms of what the pore size was, being 5 microns, and what the size of a naked COVID virus was, and what the size of a COVID virus encapsulated in a cocoon of water molecules and potentially some lipid molecules, and what the size of that would be, and what would it take to filter those out. And I did the work. And I said, this doesn't add up either. So,
which we finally saw in the New York Times, like what, was that 6 months ago or 5 months ago now? It took them a lot longer than it took you.
Well, you know what they say, Andy, nobody likes an I told you so person. But I think that for me right now, this is a wonderful place. I have 7 grandchildren, 5 and under, and my wife and I celebrated 45 years of marriage just the other day. My plan is to continue to try to share with people who are interested my view on healthcare and health freedom and parental rights, and also some of the political issues of the day as, if you will, scrutinized by someone with my perspective. And everybody has a unique perspective. My perspective is a family doctor, having served in the Senate, having had the opportunity to run for governor, having had a chance to make many mistakes and to do a few things well. And you put all that together, and some people out there are interested in what I have to say. I think going forward, if there's a new thrust to what I'm doing, I don't think that necessarily involves more campaigns, but I think it does involve almost emanating from the person of Scott Jensen, a demand that I will not participate in these bullying kinds of salacious conversations or confrontations that people seem hell-bent on having take place.
Yeah.
I think that we have to be able to say, look at what Governor Tim Walz and the DFL legislature did this past session. And you can say that to introduce a negative perspective or a positive perspective. And let me give you the positive perspective. Governor Walz and the leaders of the House and the Senate demonstrated to Minnesota how you can assertively utilize the reins of control and leadership and get an agenda passed. That has not been done for some time. I think when I was in the legislature, I think that we could have done a lot more when we had the House and the Senate under Republican control. Granted, we did not have the governor's office, but we could have done a lot more had we been willing to lead the conversation. And the way you lead that conversation sometimes is just ask the hard questions. I don't think we did that. I think the Democrats came in and said, we're doing it. So I think that it's interesting that the way I want to go forward personally sounds to me an awful lot like the way you want to go forward with your newly founded company, Optiv. Civil discourse, not attacking, crossing the aisle. I think we have to have that kind of forum in the public square. And I think for young people to have that place to go, we've got some outstanding, exceptional, if you will, podcasters and media personalities out there. But often they will have to make a choice. Well, we're going to lean this way hard to satisfy that base, or lean this way hard to satisfy that base. Sounds to me like you're saying you're going to do everything in your power to stay front and center and saying, no, we're not going there, we're not going there. We need that space where people between the ages of 15 and 50 have the chance to know that we're going to have civil discourse. You're not going to see the name calling. There's going to be good ideas coming from both sides of the aisle. And that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So I applaud your effort, because your effort's based around creating a new company. My effort that I just mentioned is really my own personal thrust going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just say that one of the, before we wrap this up, maybe the most important thing to me personally is the intergenerational relationships that I've been able to develop by doing things like podcasting. I think a lot of young people get really hyped up, and when they have a new idea or when they feel like they belong to a party, they get really jacked up about it and they think that they know everything. And I've tried my best to, like I probably am a little bit too arrogant for a 23-year-old, but my goal was to get myself around people like you who are older than me, who had some wisdom, who had lived an entire life, so that I could be an example to people my age that there's actually, as much as people our age want to dismiss the older generations, there's a lot of really great things to learn from you guys. I mean, you've lived an entire life, and there's so much that I can learn, and there's so much I have learned. And so to you, thank you so much, because people don't know, but 3 years ago, I made the drive from Madison, Wisconsin here to Minneapolis after we had a phone call, and I was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. I didn't know how to dress nicely, didn't know what I was really doing, but I asked if we could do a podcast, and we did one podcast. And in a lot of ways, that changed the whole trajectory of my life. I came up here, we did the campaign, I got married, now we have a kid, and we're going to have another kid. It's like my whole life changed. And it's just because somebody like you took a chance on somebody like me. And so I think yeah, I don't know. So I just say thank you for that.
Thank you. And I think that the world is so interconnected that the words of Edmund Burke should echo across the land, and they go something like this. The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. You don't get to do nothing. I don't get to do nothing. I don't think anybody gets to do nothing. I think that we have to engage, we have to talk, and I think your generation does have some special challenges because you've been literally raised with that. Well, it's almost like a sibling is your technology.
Yeah.
I mean, where the time I spent growing up perhaps was watching or playing with my older brother. You had your phone. And your older brother may not have been there.
Yeah.
He or your older sister may have been somewhere else with their own phone. And the groups were smaller, and oftentimes certain skills that we took for granted, you didn't necessarily develop.
In a lot of ways, we're just learning how to talk to people just now. I mean, at 20 years old, you know, which is it's sad, but you can look at the downside of it, or you can say, you know, we got to do something about this, right? If you don't do anything, there's no option in that. And so,
when I think too, Andy, that you will not be cowed as a generation by some of the things that my generation is cowed by. We are at times frightened to death of our computer going down or not knowing how to reboot something. So, you know, it just seems to me like it's going to work out a lot better if we tap into each other's strengths and keep understanding that everybody's got their weaknesses. So I wish you the best of luck in your new venture. I think that engaging is huge. If I could just close with one story.
Yes.
I had a chance over the last few months to get to know Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And I've certainly watched more of his podcasts and interviews over the last few months than I had previously. But he and I spent 3 hours together by Zoom from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Minneapolis time about 2 or 3 months ago. And when we did that, I was struck by the fact that if we work at it, we really can be articulate and bold without being antagonistic. I think Jordan Peterson has the ability to pull the words from the recesses of his brain that he wants, that will grab on to the meaning that he is trying to convey to his audience. And what a gift that is. I saw him talk the other day about the importance of articulating.
Oh, yeah.
And I think articulating is perhaps an undersold talent.
Yeah.
And you're doing what you're doing. You're not just hiding behind a website where you can print up words that were rehearsed or scripted or checked and double checked. You're getting out in front of people in a podcast saying, I'm going to do my level best to articulate what I think is important, what my views are, to ask questions that will help you articulate what you believe. And I think that, at the end of the day, is probably more than reason enough to start your new company.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It means a lot. Yeah, as we wrap this up, I guess for people who are listening and they enjoyed this, obviously share this with your friends. If you want to know more about Optiv Network, go to optivnetwork.com. There's a lot of stuff on there. Scott, if people want to, obviously this is going to be on your platforms, but if people want to know more about what you're doing, where can they go?
Probably the best thing to do is follow my platforms. I think if they want to get a hold of my book and read that, drscottjensenbook.com, drscottjensenbook.com. The books are available for $20 online. And I think that they'll see why I'm saying that we've been played and why I've said so many times, if they do it to me, they can do it to you.
Yeah.
And I think that for now, I'm certainly enjoying the ability to not be so intensely out in front of hundreds of people every day.
Yeah.
But I'm passionately committed to making certain that this incredible experiment in freedom called the United States of America doesn't falter or fail. So I won't be going away.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you.
And we'll talk soon.
All right.
See ya.